Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back for another video. For those of you guys who potentially might be new to this YouTube channel, welcome to Knox Ave Barbecue. For those of you guys who might be wondering who I am, I'm just some guy who spent some time working in barbecue restaurants in Texas and sharing with you some of the barbecue knowledge that I've gained over the years. And what I want to do in this video, especially since it's the beginning of a new year, is to kind of give you guys everything that you kind of need to start off if you're new to barbecue or if you're just trying to get a little bit more advanced in what you need to do in the kitchen and outside. So today I'm going to give you things that I absolutely need to have in the kitchen to prep and just cooking in general. And then I'm going to also give you guys things that you don't really need, but it definitely makes your life a whole lot easier. So with that being said, let's get started. The very first thing that I'm actually going to suggest is a cutting board. This is a Teak House edge grain cutting board. The one thing that I really love about this cutting board is, I mean, just in general, the looks of it, I think the aesthetics of it are great. It has a nice medium color on the grain. The material of this board, it's soft, so it's really gentle on your knives. It's got grips on the side, so you don't have to feel like you have to get your fingers underneath the cutting board to lift it up. And the other thing that I really like about this cutting board is that it doesn't have like the grooves on the outside where it's supposed to collect those juices. I've never really enjoyed that style of cutting board. I feel like you lose surface to work on your cutting block. And so giving one that's really nice and flat all the way across, I really like. And this particular one is a larger size. This is a 24 by 18 by 1 inch block. So it's fairly large, it's kind of heavy, but I like the fact that it's like an inch thick. There's less chance of it warping. And the 24 by 18 surface just gives you so much room to kind of work.
Look at all this floor space. So much aerobics in here. So many activities.
One of my pet peeves is having a cutting board that's way too small and you just slowly run out of space and you just feel like cramped or claustrophobic just on like a small cutting board. But with that being said, I would say find a cutting board that fits in your sink. I got this cutting board a while back, and that was before we upgraded into a larger sink, which made it kind of annoying to clean. So I would just say get the largest cutting board that you possibly can, that you feel comfortable cleaning and keeping maintenance with. Even though it's a lot thicker, it still technically can still warp. And so what I would recommend is making sure you get some oil and some kind of cream on top of those boards to make sure they stay nice and soft. You don't want them to dry out too much or they'll start chipping or warping. If you guys can, if you have the money to do so, I would highly recommend investing in a nice cutting board. Next thing, and probably more importantly, the things that you're gonna need is gonna be some knives. For me, in terms of barbecue, I feel like there's only 3 knives that I feel like I really need. The first one is a chef's knife. This is a Victorinox 8-inch chef's knife. It comes in really sharp, it's easy to sharpen. I think it's about 50 bucks now. I think when I first got this thing was probably like 25 or 30 bucks. The popularity in this brand, and especially this knife, has grown over time for a good reason. This is actually a really great knife to have. If you're starting to learn how to use knives and you're not wanting to break the bank on a knife, nor should you if you feel uncomfortable with knives, this is definitely one to go with. Next knife that I like is this 6-inch curved boning knife, which is also from Victorinox. When I first started barbecuing, it was all Dexter, and a lot of people still prefer Dexter over Victorinox, but I personally like the grip on the Victorinox a lot better. Give me 1 second. This is an old Dexter 6-inch curved boning knife I had. And if you can see the texture of the handle, it is still that plastic, but it's kind of got these grooves that go this way. And when your hands are dry, it's nice and grippy. Once you start trimming through a lot of briskets or a lot of ribs, and it kind of gets slick from like dealing with all the fat and the trimmings, the handle kind of gets slippery even though you wipe it down. This Victorinox handle, you can see it's still plastic, but it's kind of like matted a little bit. I just feel like, after I clean it, it just stays a little bit more like slip resistant than the other Dexter knife. The other thing to consider is also the shape of the knife. I personally prefer the curve. A lot of people like it flat. I would say if you're really curious, try to get both, but after trimming briskets and ribs for a very long time, this is the shape that I prefer. The third knife that I think is important, which is funny because I just mentioned 2 Victorinox knives, but with the slicer, I prefer the 12-inch Dexter. I've had this knife for a very long time and it just works really great for barbecue. I think some other slicers, including the Victorinox I did buy one time, like the teeth on them are a little bit too tall. It kind of shreds the bark of the brisket or ribs or whatever a little bit too much. It like bites into it, and then when you try to make that first cut, it just kind of shreds a little bit. So I like the fact that the teeth on these Dexters aren't too tall, even though the handle on this one is like the same as the one that I talked about before. But because the blade is so much better, in my opinion, I like the Dexter for my slicer. Now this is kind of like a bonus knife. It's not one that you absolutely need, but I've actually been grabbing this a lot more frequently. Wouldn't you guess it? It's another Victorinox. And this is a 6-inch, I think you can say it's like a chef's knife or a paring knife. I'll be honest with you, when I first started to really having to do a lot more prep in the kitchen, this 8-inch chef's knife felt a little bit too big and a little bit unstable for me. Earlier this year, I got this 6-inch one, and man, I felt after I got comfortable with the 8-inch one, I got this one, and I just started reaching for this one a lot more frequently than the 8-inch chef knife, especially things like dicing onions or garlic and things like that. Like, it can kind of do it all. The only time I really reach for the 8-inch chef knife is when I was trying to rough chop some like herbs like parsley or cilantro, or if I was slicing a big piece of meat where the 6-inch blade might be a little bit too short. But they're both great. I use both of them still regularly. But if you're looking for a knife that might be a little less kind of scary up front and a little bit easier to use, I would definitely try this 6-inch chef's knife. A lot of people that work the cutting block a lot will say is a very important tool is a bench scraper. I again bought the Dexter ones for a while and they were great. They also have that same grip and that same plastic that does get slippery, especially when you're working the block. But the one thing that really turned me off is I got one last time and the bench scraper was bent. Like, a bench scraper that's not straight is almost useless and can ruin your cutting board because it has a sharp edge that will just dig into it when you try to scrape it. The one that I recently got that I think is really great is, this is a Amazon Basic one. I don't know if you can see the logo in the center. The one thing that I really like about this one is the handle. And it has like a rubbery-ish feel to it, which is really great when your hands get wet. I've been using this one a lot more lately, and you know, especially when you're doing a lot of prep and you got a lot of vegetables, and it's really nice to take this to kind of use this and scrape it off the cutting board instead of using your knife and doing like this and kind of using that edge of your knife to continuously scrape the cutting board and dull your edge of your knife. So to save your knife, to save your board, definitely recommend this Amazon Basic, you know, bench scraper. Now, with all these knives that we talked about, they're all fairly cheap. They're pretty easy to replace, will stay really sharp, but can dull pretty quickly. And I've gotten these knives professionally sharpened, and because of the quality of what they are and how they're gonna do it, it's only a couple bucks to do so, and it turns out to be really, really nice. But sometimes, you know, I let my knives go a little bit too far, and I just need to get a sharp edge, especially like when you're trimming a bunch of briskets or ribs, and you just really need to sharpen your knife really quickly. This is a controversial opinion, but I like having one of these handy right here. If you guys haven't seen one of these before, this is kind of one of these Restaurant Depot-like knife sharpeners. Please do not use them on your nicer knives, because what these basically do is shave off all of the metal off your knives to create a new edge. I mean, that's basically what you do with a whetstone and things like that, but this is to an extreme, which is why, like, I only recommend using that if you have cheaper knives like the ones that I just talked about. They'll still last you a while. It's not like you shave it down like 3 or 4 times and your knife is done, but in a pinch, this thing definitely does help a lot, and it's nice to have in your back pocket whenever you're doing prep. Next is having a trusty thermometer. This is a Javelin Pro. People might be asking me, like, Joe, why don't you have a thermopen like everyone else does? And honestly, it's just because, like, when I first started to get into barbecue, this is a Javelin Pro, but there was a just a regular one. I think it was about maybe 3/4 of the size. That was one that I always used. I saw the Pro come out. It's just cheaper than a thermopen. I know the thermopen reads faster, but I'm not in that much of a rush where I can't wait. But the other big difference is this thing has a magnet in the back, so and I just feel like they're just a little bit sturdier than Thermopens are. I don't even know why, but a couple of guys that I was working with would constantly drop them and they would just shatter. I have no idea. And I'm not saying that Thermopens are bad. I just am so shocked that those guys were breaking them so frequently. But I luckily always had this in my back pocket and never had an issue. So why do I like this one? It's just the fact that I've always had it and it's never failed me. All right, the next thing is gonna be probably something that you're gonna need whether you're barbecuing or you're in the kitchen, and that's some containers. And just like any other person that you've seen on the internet and you see a bunch of chefs like using deli containers, well, it's because they're great. You can buy a sleeve of these, 32-ounce ones. You can buy a sleeve of these 16-ounce ones and then these 8-ounce ones, and you really can just use them for anything and everything. Easy to use or easy to clean, and unlike Tupperware where you have to find the right lid, all of these have the same exact lid. So buy a sleeve of each size, buy a sleeve of lids, and you'll be good to go with the storage. All right, now this is probably another one of my favorite things is sheet pans. You guys have seen me use sheet pans quite a bit, whether it's just dry brining something, bringing stuff outside to the smoker or back inside after cooking something. Having a couple of half sheet pans are great to have, whether you're actually gonna put them in the oven. You can, reserve some of them to go in the smoker because they will get nice and dark from being in that smoke. Also getting a couple cooling racks that will fit on here so that when you finish off steaks or you're resting any, maybe like chickens. So I like to have a couple of these half pans, a couple quarter pans, and a couple eighth pans just for different situations. They're fairly cheap, but they go a long way. And especially as you do barbecue, sometimes when you got a lot of things cooking and you need to have places for this food to rest. And I know a lot of people might have cafeteria trays. I got a bunch of them too, and I used to use those when I did prep. And I still do sometimes when I run out of these pans. When it gets a little bit greasy, it's a little bit hard to clean. And these aluminum pans are just a lot easier to clean and easier to maintain. So yeah, highly recommend getting all 3 sizes. Next, getting yourself different size mixing bowls. Certain things that I'm looking for in a nice mixing bowl. I personally don't like having the rubber on the bottom, even though it helps because it's stable in some cases, but because of that rubber, sometimes when you're trying to whisk things or mix things around, that rubber kind of gets in the way and makes your thing kind of rock in a way that you kind of don't want it to. Really important to me is having one that has like a flat bottom and having one that's a little more wide instead of ones that are a little more boxy and have higher walls, and having different sizes for different situations is also important. But as you guys can see, the construction of all these are all very different because it's some stuff that my mom has collected over the years. But if I was starting from scratch and I was just gonna buy like a set, I would try to find one that's 3 or 4 different sizes, has a wider mouth and a flat bottom. I don't feel like you have to spend a ridiculous amount of money on mixing bowls, but you also don't want to go too cheap because you're going to have to replacing them anyway. Now, speaking of mixing bowls and trying to get all that stuff off of those edges of a bowl, one thing that I'm also going to recommend is a silicone spatula. I don't know why, but I've only just recently started using this and it is amazing. It just allows you to get every bit of any liquid or dressing or sauce or whatever, and you don't have to, but having one that's a little bit larger and one smaller, it definitely does help. Depending on, again, size of your bowl matters a lot, but if you need to get one, I would just find one that's a little bit larger, and I promise you it'll go a long way to make sure it just makes your cleaning a lot easier, that you maximize your portions for any liquids, and will make your dishwashing a lot easier because you'll have more stuff in containers that you need them to be instead of stuff that you have to clean in the sink. Next on our list are a bunch of towels. Towels are great. It's just gonna keep everything really nice and neat. Whether it's just wiping off your cutting board, or it's picking something out of your oven when you can't find your oven mitts, or just wiping off your hands after dealing with a lot of food. It's just one of those tools that it's always nice to have around. I know I used to waste a lot of paper towel trying to clean up messes and just wiping it and throwing it away. My mom always yells at me for wasting paper towels, so I went out and bought a bunch of these. And even though you'll see a lot of like kitchen towels that are white and they have the different colored streaks on them to designate what they're used for. If you're just at home and you're just gonna use them all for the same thing, like I still got some in different colors, for the same reason. Like I want to use them for different jobs, but for the darker ones, I want them for some dirtier jobs. The other reason why I love these towels is because you just kind of get them a little bit wet, put it underneath your cutting board, and then while you're cutting and doing anything, your cutting board won't slide. I told you guys it was things that were necessities. I do feel like everything that we just talked about right now were kind of necessities. You need a good cutting board, you need your knives, you need things to kind of take care of yourself, you need places to put your food. And now I'm gonna be talking about two pieces of cookware that I personally use a lot. And I kind of grab these two things depending on what the situation is. First one is this carbon steel pan. I recently got this one, and I'll be honest with you, like there's a learning curve to it for sure. I stripped off the seasoning a couple times, I didn't quite dry as much as I thought I needed to, so it did rust a little bit. My mom used this the other day and didn't dry it, so it did rust, so I had to kind of like bring it back. There is definitely more maintenance to using this than your traditional pan, but the one thing that I love about this carbon steel pan is that it just stays so hot. I would never say overcrowding your pan is a good thing. Like even with something like this, you probably shouldn't, but even those times where I did, I was still able to get really great browning around all the food that I was cooking on this thing. And the other thing that I like about this pan is that the handle is connected on the outside right here, so that on the inside, when you're trying to scrape the edges of your pan, you're not hitting these kind of bolts that are holding the handle to the pan. So it really allows you to scrape the edges if necessary. It's nice and wide, retains a lot of heat. It does take a lot of maintenance, but just like I said with the cutting board, how it allows cooking to be a little bit more fun. When I went from that 8-inch chef's knife to the smaller 6-inch one, and this carbon steel pan is one of those things where I'm like looking forward to cooking and clean this thing properly and to build up a better like non-slick surface and get it seasoned the way that it needs to be taken care of and things like that. Obviously, if you don't care about that kind of stuff, don't buy this thing. This is not something that you need. This is something that if you just want to have a little more fun in the kitchen, try different things. I've had cast iron pans before and I still have them, but this is something that I actually prefer a lot more. Okay, this is one that you absolutely don't need to have, or at least this version you don't need to have, but I love it. And I'm sure if you guys have been watching my videos over the last year, you guys have seen this before based off the color. This is the Le Creuset Dutch oven. This thing is expensive. I honestly didn't know what this was. My sister got this from my mom a while back. She doesn't use it as frequently, so I've decided to take it upon myself to cook with it more. This thing is awesome. Similar to the carbon steel pan, this thing just retains a lot of heat. This is something that I reach for when I'm doing things like rendering tallow, when I'm braising something on a low heat. When you're frying it, it's got high enough walls and it retains enough heat so your oil stays hot and the temperatures don't fluctuate that much. But this thing is expensive. My sister is very nice and I am reaping the benefits of her generosity for sure. But there are other versions of this that other companies make that I've read reviews on that are pretty good as well, and I'll notify you guys what they are at the end of this video. I would say the only additional thing that you might need other than this and the carbon steel pan is a really tall stock pot if you guys are into making really large batches of stock, which I do sometimes, but I've also done it in here too and it works great. So again, this is not a need, this is a I really like and I use as much as I possibly can. One of my least favorite jobs in barbecue is making barbecue sauce. It's not like it's hard to make. Trying to get the right consistency and trying to mix all the ingredients together is really annoying. But this one item changed it for me and I will now make barbecue sauce not as angry. And that is a hand blender. I don't even know when my mom got this thing, and I'm pretty sure she got this from making smoothies or maybe making tomato sauce one time or something like that. But I take it upon myself to make this my personal sauce mixer. The thing with barbecue sauces, and I try to explain this every single time I make barbecue sauce on this YouTube channel, is that if you don't mix certain ingredients at a certain time, certain ingredients react to other ingredients and they start to clump. You can get those clumps out, but it'll take you a really long time. Some spices like garlic powder, onion powder will clump, or things like cayenne, and you don't want anyone to bite into a clump of cayenne in your barbecue sauce. Once you figure out all your measurements, having this to mix your barbecue sauce will make your life a lot easier. Next is a food scale. Now this model is not the most glamorous looking thing. There's obviously designs that are way more sleek than this son of gun, but I have literally had this thing since I started selling barbecue in my backyard, which was 9 years ago. The reason why I initially bought this one, I was weighing out meat. I needed to make sure that I wasn't getting a scale that can only go up to 5 pounds or 3 pounds. This has a capacity of, I believe, 15 pounds, and something this small that has a capacity of 15 pounds is pretty awesome. Even when I'm weighing out stuff for sausage and spices, it does do a pretty good job of getting weight of like even the super really light ingredients. For things that are really super light, there are obviously other scales for those purposes, but I really like this one because it does a really good job of having a really high capacity, but also has the ability to still get really like small grams and stuff like that. A lot of my recipes lately that I've been trying developing has all been through weight, even with liquids. If that is what you want to do as well, I would highly recommend this scale right here. Speaking of sausage making, this is my 1/2 horsepower meat grinder. I bought this one, I think like 2 years ago. For those of you guys who are trying to get into sausage making, please invest in a nicer grinder. There are grinders that are much stronger than this one, but for what I'm doing, 1/2 horsepower is plenty. For those of you guys who are really trying to get into doing pop-ups, or maybe just trying to make sure you don't waste as much food, this is a great way to make those burger grinds with your scraps, to get every little bit of your tallow out from your scraps by grinding it through before you start throwing it into an oven or smoker or whatnot. Highly recommend a really high quality meat grinder. Also, they do not sponsor me, but if they did, that'd be really awesome. So this is our Haka 7-pound sausage stuffer. This is a pretty plain Jane sausage stuffer. There's not that many functions to it, but everything is just really easy to use. Up here, there are 2 different notches where you can stick the handle. One is to slowly bring the plunger down to push out the farce to stuff your sausage. And then there's another one where it's to bring the plunger up quickly, which I didn't really think was really needed, but I realized that when you're stuffing a lot of sausage, like it helps you move a lot quicker. Because if that plunger went really slow when you're trying to bring it up, I would be super annoyed and trying to reload it as quickly as I possibly can. Now, the one thing that I will say is I wish that I got one that had a bigger capacity. At least for my purposes, anytime I've been making sausage, it's been a lot. There was a video where I did a pop-up where I did 50 pounds of sausage, and to load this thing up over and over again was really annoying. I'm not necessarily sure what your guys' goal is, but I would also say, like, once you start getting to sausage making, it is a lot of work to pull up the grinder, to make all the farce, to stuff all the sausage, and the cleanup is pretty messy. It's a lot of sausage juice just everywhere. Once you make a really good batch and you taste it, you're like, damn, I should have made more. I wouldn't say buy the biggest sausage stuffer that you can possibly get, but just kind of like a smoker. You don't want to buy the smallest one just so you can say you have one, but if you know that you can do a little bit more, you want to eventually cook a little bit more, maybe go up to the next step and get the next biggest size. All right, guys, so that's kind of everything that I have for you today. I mean, there's more stuff that I could show you guys, but I feel like it would be too much. This was kind of a lot too, I know, just to start, but I just hope that this is kind of like your, like starter pack for cooking and prepping barbecue, because having the right tools around with you and stuff that you can rely on just makes your job a lot easier. Now that this video is finished, and maybe there are certain things that your guys are interested in, but you're kind of like, what did Joe say? Was it this one or that one, where do I go find it? And just to make things easier for you guys, what I did is, if you look in the description below, I created a link to a Amazon storefront where I found a lot of the stuff that I use. Like I went back through my history and just kind of like added that stuff to the storefront. And even for me, like for example, the stuff like those mixing bowls, I already have them and I don't want to waste money by buying new ones, at least not now. But I did add some links to stuff that I would personally buy now if I was starting from scratch. So if you guys are looking to kind of revamp your kitchen, definitely go check out that storefront and see what's available there. As I continue to cook, find other things that I really like, I'll continue to add them to that storefront. So if you guys are ever curious about something that I'm using, you guys can always go there. But with that, I hope that you guys and myself can continue to elevate our cooking, because as we get better at just cooking in general is when we can make our barbecue better. I feel like the purpose of the channel is 3 things. 1 is that I teach you guys a lot about barbecue. 2 is that we get better as cooks. And 3 is that we push barbecue forward. I'm hoping that this video will allow me to do my part in that and allow you to do yours. But that's it for this video, guys. And if you guys enjoyed it, please make sure to like, subscribe, share this video with your friends, and I'll see you guys in the next one.